Thank you. Appreciate it. I'm really not used to being called Dr. Ellis at church on Sunday, so to most everyone in the room, I'm Henry, and so I feel like that's what I should be, particularly at church. You know, as we talk through the next hour, my goal is just to teach you guys a little bit about what we're seeing in our kids and how we are overdoing it, recognizing that everyone in the room has a different scenario, different situation, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But, you know, more importantly, I'll tell you, I'll be the first person to admit that I am not the perfect parent. I don't think Jesus expects us to be perfect. I know that we all want to be perfect and we want our kids to be perfect, but that's really not the role here. The role is just to try to find ways in which we can be a little bit better. And so today we're going to talk a lot about youth sports and what's going on and what's happening. But just know that I'm not up here saying that I abide by all of these myself, because I don't, but Casey and I try really hard. What we're going to talk about today is we're going to kind of cover a couple things. One of them is we're just going to talk about what do we talk about youth sports and injuries? You know, what is actually going on? You either have had a kid who has one or you've heard someone say it. What's going on in sports medicine right now? Why is it becoming an explosion? Some misconceptions, we're just going to touch on that a little bit. And then I'm going to try to give you guys 10 takeaways. I will tell you everything like sleep, nutrition, injury prevention can really be its own hour by itself. So we're just going to touch on some tips so you guys have some takeaways and hopefully some opportunities to improve. You know, right now, as you think about, you know, what is going on with your kid, and I want you to think to yourself, to ask them, why do you play sports? Why do they play sports? And it's interesting because there's actually been surveys, so we know, and I'm going to tell you why they play. Majority of them play because they like to have fun, and that's what it's all about. But interesting, in the same survey, what I thought was pretty interesting was, you know, less than half of the female athletes say they really don't play to win or win a champion. It was surprising to me. I thought we always played to win. Lastly, a third say they play to make their family proud. I think everyone in this room probably doesn't want their kids to necessarily play for them, but to play because they want to play. So just put that in the back of your head as we talk through the rest of this morning. And I'm going to start off with a story, and hopefully no one in this room has been a part of this story, but the story is someone shows up in my clinic, and she is 5 weeks away from drill team tryouts. And this is all that she's wanted for the last 3 years. She has been training 16 hours a week. Parents have invested, $30,000 a year in drill team tryouts. Everyone's emotional. Mom's emotional, dad's emotional, she's emotional, and she says, well, I have hip pain, Dr. Ellis. What do I do about it now? Tryouts are in 5 weeks. And every doctor, we get an x-ray. And I'll tell you, I don't think you guys have to go to medical school or get training to look at this x-ray. I think you can clearly tell the difference between what we call the ischial apophysis. This is where your hamstring inserts into your pelvis. So this is real life, real changes that occur to the growth plate around your pelvis, where that hamstring has just been pulling and pulling and pulling, and high kick's been going and going and going. And now you've created probably relatively permanent problems. Maybe not permanent, we'll find some solutions here and there, but this is definitely a tough solution and tough place to be. So you talk about someone who's been dedicated and invested, and now it's 5 weeks away. Well, what do I do? And that's a problem we don't want to get ourselves in, is to try so hard for one moment, because there's a lot of physical and mental that goes into both of that. So when we say the term overuse injuries, I'm sure you guys have seen it like on the front page or Sports Illustrated. You know, overuse injuries are up 600% in our kids, and that is very true. And you think, well, what does that mean? Is it just that tendonitis and that tennis elbow that a lot of us end up having? What does it really mean in kids? I'm going to give you guys some examples so that you guys know, but it's really not just overuse injuries, but it's also ACL injuries. ACL injuries, no matter what insurance database, county, state in the U.S. you look at, in kids, it's really, the graph is growing in every area. And ACL injuries is not, that's a year away from playing their sports. It increases the risk of long-term arthritis by tenfold. It's a big deal. We shouldn't just settle on, well, I don't think that'll be my kid, because I get that a lot in my clinic. where they think, well, I just didn't think it was going to happen to me. All right, let's cover some overuse injuries so you guys have a good idea of what we're talking about. This here is a freshman. He really wants to play basketball. He loves to play basketball. He's been working because he really wants to play, but his knee hurts so bad. Everyone here has probably heard of Osgood-Schlatter. This is what a pretty bad case of Osgood-Schlatter looks like on x-ray, where you actually can have so severe you grow another piece of bone, and we can't take that away. It's not like tendonitis, where we can just, anti-inflammatories rest. This bone probably won't ever go away and may have long-term implications. And I said, we got to rest. He goes, I can't rest. I got the coach. He's watching the freshman game to figure out who's going to be on JV and varsity. And now we've got ourselves in another very hard predicament. Sophomore made it in state in track and field. Now she can't run at all. And the reason is because, she's got the same problem in a different location where the growth plate up at her pelvis where hip flexors are. Now you have some more significant changes to the bone, much harder to fix. Level 10 gymnast. The cartilage in the bone didn't develop, and now she literally has a pothole in that elbow. This is from overuse. Fortunately, we can treat it, but it is surgery, and it is a year away from their sports as well. Very sad is when I was putting this talk together about 8 weeks ago, came back and her elbow had healed, and then she said, well, I have knee pain, and we found the same problem in her knee. Stress fracture in the back. We do see this more and more. I've been seeing it more in lacrosse players than almost anything. You can see the amount of inflammation in the back that you see there. It can cause a fracture, and many times those don't ever heal and certainly do put you at risk of long-term back pain. So when we say the words overuse, it really has such a strong meaning for all of our kids, and we really want to do everything we can to avoid it. As we talk today, I will tell you that every kid of ours is different. They have different needs. They play different sports. They have different goals. And so we have to adjust what we do as parents to try to fit those needs safely. And so when I talk today, there's a lot of opportunity for me to really dive in to the female soccer player or to the baseball thrower. But in broad strokes, I'd say that there's opportunities for injury prevention in all of these sports together. You almost just have to be very deliberate as an adult to find it for them. So what's happening? What's happening to our culture, and why are we at this situation that we're at today? Well, I'm going to give you guys some references right now. When you look at big organizations as a whole, professional sports, Major League Baseball is a $10 billion industry. You've got PGA's about $1.5 billion, probably a little bit more now. NBA, $10 billion, and NFL probably the largest at an $18 billion industry. And you got to think to yourself, well, what is the industry of youth sports today? Well, right now, it's almost a $40 billion industry, and by 2030, it's almost $70 billion industry, so almost double, and that's on the rate of growth right now. And here's the deal. It's recession-proof. We've seen it. No matter how bad our income can be, we will never take it away from the opportunities of our children. So in 2008, during COVID, we didn't see a decline in the industry at all. We continued to see it grow. So it is a big deal, and you got to think in the back of your head, well, why is this happening? Well, I'll say it, I know it's pointing to you guys, but I got to monitor this pointing to me too, because it's really us. And I'm not going to say that we can change it, but I think it's important for those of us to know what the problem is. I mean, the problem is that we are all willing to get in an airplane to take our second grader to New York for a lacrosse tournament. We're willing to spend 12 to 14 hours a day at the convention center and pay $45 a head and $25 for parking for a 90-second cheer routine. It has just gotten to, the growth has been so great, but the problem is we're willing to pay for it. And I've gone to these games, and I'm like, wait a second, I'm paying to be on the team, I'm paying to be in this tournament, and I got to pay to watch? This is crazy. And fortunately, my kids don't do the cheer, and I hear that's a lot worse because all the dads tell me that I should calm down because I'm just irritated about the $10. But that's the problem. And you walk into these things and you're like, Every person here just paid $45 to get into this room for to watch 90 seconds, and there is almost nothing that I can think of that we'd be willing to pay $45 per person for. So we are the problem, and we have to recognize that, and that is what makes it so difficult. I'm going to tell you one more story before I move on. I was given at an injury prevention symposium, I was the moderator of a panel of owners of club sports. And, I posed the question of, if you really care about your athletes, why are you doing year-round volleyball? And it was a guy that was locally in town, and he said, listen, I get it. I'm all in. I hear what you say. I need to give these volleyball players 3 months off a year. He goes, but here's the deal. The parents demand it. They want to be here all year round. If I say I take 3 months off, that's 25% less revenue. And the parents, if I say take 3 months off, they'll just go to another volleyball because that's what they do. And he goes, so I am trying to juggle it and do safe things for my kids, but we've got to have this year round because the parents are willing to pay and they demand it. And I would almost say that almost all of us in this room are a bit partially guilty of that. Okay, so in this mess, I've already blamed you guys for most of our problems, or I should say you, us. But what are our kids hearing? And I think it's important. These are some things that I hear in the clinic, at least the interaction with the kids. More training is better. Get up early. You can do anything. We need more privates. You weigh too much. You won't make the team. You lose your spot on the team. We've spent too much money. This is actually mine. I think I've said we spent too much money for you to, I can't remember how I followed that sentence. What else are you going to do? Quit wasting your time. A lot of negative things that I'm sure either emotionally you guys have ever thought, heard, or I can honestly say I've honestly said a few of these. Well, when we think about it, we're here today, so we all want to do a better job. I think this really comes to what we want them to hear, right? Have fun, be a competitor, try hard. I mean, those things that are very positive and uplifting. And how about I just love to watch you? I mean, because that really is true, right? Michael Lewis wrote in his book when he started talking about youth sports that he felt like every time he watched his kids' sports, it was like watching the Super Bowl every weekend. And I think a lot of us have that inner emotion. I'm going to touch on this 10,000 hour rule. I'm going to dive into this a little bit. This is a misconception, right? Has anyone read Outliers? I like Malcolm Gladwell, so I think it's a good book. Well, what I don't like is he's really popularized this 10,000 hour rule. And it's not necessarily that it's 10,000 hours. It's the concept of practicing more will get you where you need to be. And that's not right. A great follow-up book, okay, if you like that kind of stuff, is David Epstein's The Sports Gene. And it really kind of does a little bit more of diving into nature versus nurture. What do we do for our kids versus what were they born with in terms of athletics? And what's really interesting is, baseball, we see a lot of overuse injuries. We have pitch counts. But professional baseball players, you know what makes you a good hitter? One of the leading factors that makes you a good hitter? Your eyesight. You've got to be able to see the ball as it comes out of the pitcher's hand. Well, that has nothing to do with how much you're working with your pitching coach. It has to do with what you're born with. And so some people just naturally have it and some people don't. Malcolm Gladwell quotes an article, and this is the article. Actually, I pulled the article, read the article to know why is Malcolm Gladwell saying this? What is the big deal? Well, it was really looking at violinists to see who were the experts, who were the great violinists. Well, he realized that the great violinists, they practiced more than everybody else. And that's what, that's the top graph is the best students and the bottom graph is the good students. But what no one ever talks about is the fact that another statistically significant is also sleep. Those that slept more also were the great students as opposed to the good students. So no one ever talks. We just say, you got to practice, you got to practice, you got to practice. But we forget to think that sleep can equally be as important. We'll go into that a little bit more. So I've said a lot of, it's a problem. We got to fix it. We got to fix it. So you guys are probably thinking, well, what do I do about it? I hear you, Ellis. What's the next thing to do? And there's a lot of resources, and I can't cover every sport today, and I'm not going to. But if your kid is in a sport and you guys are thinking about it and you want to know more about it, okay? So the USA basketball, great. They've even put guidelines in for youth basketball. Any sports, the American Orthopedic Society of Sports Medicine, they've put together Pitch Smart as a collaboration from USA Baseball as well as Major League Baseball. The NFL has done something similar. There are a lot of resources. You just have to go and be deliberate. And you got to go in there, you got to read about it, you got to know about it, you got to know what the pitch counts are, what they mean, and you've got to be an advocate for your child, and that's the best way to get this done. The Ultimate Assist is a book. Greg Naird is here in the Dallas area. He's become a very good friend of mine. I've done a lot of work with him. He now runs and manages the Mavericks Hoops program. He put together this book, and his very first chapter is, what is my role as a parent? And the very first sentence is, your role as a parent is not the coach. And I think that's really important for us to continue to consider. So there are a lot of resources out there, and if you guys want to know more about your individual situation, I'd encourage you guys to reach out to me, because I'm always happy, and if you guys can't tell already, I'm pretty passionate about some of this stuff. All right. We're going to go over 10 rules of thumb for you guys to think about to walk away here. First, we're going to talk about sports specialization. Okay, what is sports specialization? You guys have probably heard the term before. It's year-round playing, it's choosing a single sport, and it's quitting all other sports for one sport. So if you guys know me well enough, you know that I'm kind of naturally a researcher. I like to do research. I like to read research articles and review research articles, so I tend to usually like to quote a lot of research articles. But sports specialization in youth basketball, a survey, 772 participants, 13 to 18 years old. I would say that's the age group of a lot of our kids in the room. More than half specialized before the age of 14. But here's what I don't like, is in the last year, over half said they were physically exhausted and about half said they were mentally exhausted. Well, that's a big deal. That means we're doing too much for our kids, and we got to really ask the question of why. There's more to sports specialization. We know it increases risk, increases ankle injuries, increases ACL injuries. It does not mean that you will necessarily achieve elite status. There has been multiple articles that have said specializing sports does not make you become an elite athlete. There's an enormous amount of mental health concerns when it comes down to sports specialization, and you have higher rates of burnout. During COVID, many of you guys probably answered this survey, but we sent a survey out to all youth athletes to figure out what our kids were feeling during COVID, what was going on with them. And so this article is primarily the Dallas-Fort Worth area. We did it locally here. Well, we found that 1 in 4 athletes had elevated depression scores during the COVID pandemic, which we probably expected. But what I didn't expect was it tended to be higher in those kids that were playing one sport. So I thought, well, why is this? I can't figure out why was sports specialization. Well, I think it has to do with adaptability and resiliency, right? Because if, as a kid, their brains are not as mature as ours, and they're just used to doing one thing. And when you take that one thing away, they don't know what to do with themselves. Their brain doesn't know how to work nearly as well. And so that, to me, there's, aside from the physical aspects of sports specialization, I do think that having our kids having the ability to adapt from one thing to another and to be resilient through different scenarios is really extremely important. And again, I think we found that here. So when I talk about sports specialization, what are the rules of thumb? These are the take-home points for you guys today. Avoid single sports play at least until the age of 14. I'm going to push really hard in my own family to have them always play multiple sports. To date, my daughter doesn't really, she wants to commit right now, so it's going to continue to be a dinner table discussion. Take 3 months off of any single sport in a year, and I will tell you that this doesn't have to be consecutive. You just want your kid to take a break. Okay, so it can be Christmas holiday, July, whatever it is. They need to take 3 months total away. Avoid more than 2 competitive sports in a year. I'll tell you, we struggle with this one in my household, but it is a really important concept. There's a couple people in the room that have tennis players, maybe golf. gymnast, dance, and you say, well, that's not possible. Fine, I get it. You got to find something else for them to do. Allow them to have something else that's not just all in one bucket. Whether it's in the arts field, whether it's in cooking, whatever it is, they need something else so they're not 100% dedicated into one thing, because life's not like that. And we need to have good habits today, because in life you never end up with one thing. All right. These first three are kind of along the same, they're along the same topic. So number 2 is hours per week. This is a snapshot at my clinic in Frisco. I'm going to pick on the dancers and gymnasts. I'm really sorry about that. But to a degree, you guys, there's a reason why. So nearly 20% of the gymnasts are training more than 20 hours a week, and dancers. 20 hours a week. Okay? Look at this graph. This is how many weeks a year you're training. So you can see already they're not abiding by the rules at all. And I get it, but it is really important. Here's the rule of thumb. You should train the amount of hours per week of the age of your child. Okay? So you have a 10-year-old, organized sports needs to be 10 hours. That includes tournaments and weekends and games. So a lot of these 12, 13-year-olds that are doing 16 hours, they're doing too much. 9 times out of 10, they're going to end up having an injury that may not necessarily change their activity, but it may be significant enough. And I'll tell you, 4 to 6 weeks before Bell's tryouts, there are a lot of tears in my clinic. It's a big deal, and they're very challenging problems to fix. All right, number 3, don't have FOMO. If you don't know what FOMO is, fear of missing out, we have it as parents probably more than our kids do, but you can't. You got to drop it. I'll tell you right now, looking at NCAA data, it doesn't matter, no matter what sports you look at. Even gymnastics, 75% of them didn't necessarily specialize. So this is looking at, did they specialize in a sport? And the reality is soccer, football, almost any sport, they really didn't specialize. So NCAA data, so you're talking about collegiate athletes, right? Well, here's another same study, but if you look at it here, burnout rates are extremely high in those that specialize early. So if you're throwing in your kid to, specialize in baseball because he's really good at 10, that almost has no relevance on whether he's going to play collegiate ball. More and more studies have all demonstrated that. So here's that take-home point. As a parent, please advocate. It's okay to miss a tournament. It's okay to miss a game. You really need to balance the commitment that you've given to your team, but every extra tournament or extra opportunity where you can have some time as a family. Maybe you don't need to go to the Sunday game and go to church. Maybe you shouldn't go to the Easter weekend tournament. To think about those opportunities and every one off, you're not missing out. Trust me. Best thing you can do is pull the reins back on your kids more than is pushing them forward, because more kids than not are end up having either a serious injury or an overuse injury. I'll be honest, I gave this talk about 4 weeks ago, and I finished the talk, and Casey looked at me and she said, my favorite point you didn't even mention, and so I had to add this into the talk. But it's what I call the 70-30 rule, because I think every family needs to think about the 70-30 rule, and I oftentimes tell people that. So here's the 70-30 rule that we try to live by in our house, which is hours per week. If you think of the hours per week and what it looks like, 70% can be organized sports. That means 30% is other. What does that look like? Well, if you're doing 10 hours a week playing soccer, you need to do 4 hours a week doing something else. I'm going to tell you what that other really means, okay? For the elementary school, it means your engagement in doing something different like free play. They don't need organized soccer. Just put them in the backyard with a ball and have them figure out a game. Be deliberate about organizing a couple boys or girls over and saying, go outside and find something to do. Whatever it is, it needs to be deliberate. Or it can be you taking them to the Y or to the park, something that's just not organized. A little bit more important in even the middle school and high school kids, and this is something that we have struggled with time management, is what the 70-30 rule. Well, if you're going to play soccer 10 hours a week, you've got to go to the gym and work out 4 hours a week. Any sport needs this. Swimmers, if you're swimming for 8 hours a day, you need 3 hours of dry land. It needs to be balanced. You need to get your body prepared to do the sport that you want it to do. Having more skills, playing more soccer, doing more high kicks is not going to achieve it. It's going to be strength, conditioning, performance, and that's really the key. And I almost use the term strength, conditioning, performance, and injury prevention the same, because when you actually look at the exercises and all of the studies that talk about injury prevention and performance, they're really the same. It's just doing good exercise to prepare you for the sports. And as adults, I mean, we can't go out and run a 10K without stretching beforehand. We can't do, professional athletes, they need an off season. So I'll tell you, at the professional level, they live by that 70-30 rule. They're not out there just hammering their arms or hammering their legs. They're also getting into the gym and doing proper workouts. Okay, prevention awareness. I could probably talk all day on injury prevention, but I think what's important is for you guys just to be aware that it exists and it works. Are there ways to prevent injuries? I will tell you that when I was surprised, because we did a survey, this is a national survey, you can tell there's a lot of guys from all over the country. Turns out that parents generally don't know that injury preventions exist, and they don't know that they work. You can see it doesn't matter if you're elite or a beginner. Only 20 to 30% of people know that these exist and they're out there. They are. Sometimes you just got to Google injury prevention soccer, and you're going to get some really great resources. Injury prevention for ACL, it's by far the most common surgical procedure that I do in young kids. I'll tell you, the youngest kid I've had to do is 5. Average age of the ACL that I do in my practice is 12.5. So you can see it's very, very different, and it's almost not believable that a 10-year-old can tear their ACL, right? Elbow injuries, both gymnasts and baseball players, yes, very preventable. First question I always ask any baseball player when they come into my office is, who monitors your pitch count? How many teams do you play for? Do you ever play through elbow pain? We know that those are the 3 most important questions that you can ask. And the only factor that has been consistent for a very bad baseball elbow is playing through pain. They really have got to not throw through pain is probably the biggest way to prevent it. I will say, again, I'm a researcher, so I'm kind of a little bit a nerd at heart, and I will say there's a lot of movement patterns that we've looked at to try to figure out what movement patterns can really help you prevent injuries. And we know in basketball, but really almost every sport, the inability to what we call dorsiflex your ankle, or the inability to really elevate your foot up, if you can't get to 40 degrees, sky-high rates of ankle, knee, and hip injuries, okay? So you think the stretch of just your Achilles that we've all done before we went running, it actually, to be able to be more flexible in that joint, really helps decrease the joint ground reaction forces at the hip and at the ankle. So we know that is at least one movement pattern that can be helpful. Here's another movement pattern. I want you to look at the way that she squats. Single leg squat, as you can tell, that knee likes to collapse towards the middle or the inside. High risk problem. ACL injuries, kneecap instability problems. These movement patterns exist, but they're solvable. I'll tell you, 2 years ago, I was doing a technique video on how to examine a pediatric knee, and some of my colleagues were all in town for a conference, and they examined my daughter. 3 of them pulled me aside and said, your daughter's at high risk of having ACL injury. And I'm like, really? It's kind of embarrassing. I'm the dad who gives talks about it, and I failed to recognize that. But the truth is, we got our PT, and you should see the video differences before and after. And now she has a much more in-line land and has dramatically improved it. And I will tell you anecdotally, Casey and I noticed her performance improved quite a bit when we did something that we thought was helpful for injury prevention. There are guidelines that are available online. This is the FIFA 11. There are movement patterns. Here's the punchline, okay? You guys don't need to know this, okay? You just need to demand it on your child. you need to find a resource in the sport that you're at that will help you get to where you need to for your child, because every kid and their situation is different. And so whatever it is, injury prevention, somehow you've got to find a way to look at their movement patterns. I will tell you that one of the biggest problems we see in baseball players is as you go from Little League baseball and you start throwing a little bit more, a lot of these, prepubescent pitchers, they start pitching with bad form. I'm not a baseball player, so I'm not, this isn't really my expertise, but I'll tell you that the first thing I ask is, do you guys have a baseball coach? How's his form? Many times Dad will say, oh, his form's terrible. We've been trying to work on it. Well, and now he has a very significant elbow injury, right? And so form matters. There are resources out there. We just got to utilize them. There are a lot of risks with injuries, okay? A lot of risk factors for injuries that some of them are modifiable, some of them are not modifiable. I'm going to go to my next my next tip, which is going to be looking at previous injuries, prior injury. In any one day of clinic, I at least have 15 parents say, is my kid cleared? Can he go back? The coach needs a clearance letter. And I will tell you that I can't stand it. We really think of our kids as either being injured or healthy. And a lot of these coaches are managing 1,000 athletes, and that's how they want to think about them. So we have to figure out how we kind of manage that gray area, because the reality is there usually is a gray zone that really should be more like this than anything. It's not an on and off switch. Your kid doesn't go from being injured to being healthy. There really should be a progression, and this is one of the hardest things that I have, and many times I have to ask the parent or the adult, tell me about your situation. How can I draft a note that works well for you? These are my goals. I want this to be gradual and over time. Usually it's a 50%, 75%, 100%. It could be time. You practice for 30 minutes this week, 2 weeks, you don't have pain, you can practice for 45 minutes. Every athlete, every scenario is a little bit different. Sometimes we got to work with you to figure it out, but you need to be sure that you can advocate for this, because sometimes the easy thing for a doctor's office to do is to give you that clearance letter, and the worst thing you can do is assume that your kid who hadn't been running a marathon can now run the marathon. You know what I'm saying? And so having a prior injury can be really important. Ankle injuries are some of the most common that we see with recurrences. So is my kid's ankle healed? The trainer told me you can just tape it up and get him back. Yeah, I probably can. But ankle re-injuries are extremely high. We looked at this in a systematic review, looking at all the literature on pediatric ankle injuries to really get an understanding. Number one, recurrent rates are high. Number two is best way we know how to prevent them is balance exercises. So how do you do balance? Well, get your kid to shoot basketballs on one foot. Get them to brush their teeth on one foot. Once they say that's too easy, put 2 towels down, then ask them to brush their teeth with 1 foot. All of a sudden, balance becomes a lot harder. Definitely will prevent recurrent ankle injuries and even ankle injuries from the get-go. Set goals. Maybe this is tough to do on a really young kid, but setting goals may not be high school or collegiate or professional. And I can tell you, boy, I feel like once or twice a month, Casey and I are in the car driving home or we're at dinner, and she looks at me, she goes, I just want them to play high school sports. And I'm like, yes, I agree. I mean, I think we said it to ourselves flying home from New York at one point when, William went to a lacrosse tournament, and we said, well, what'd you think, buddy? He was like in 3rd grade. And he says, well, I would love to. It was awesome. This is my 5th favorite sport. I'm like, we realize we're part of the problem. I get it. It's easier to come up here and say it than it is to act it out. Burnout rates. You're trying to think about this of your child. Here's the deal. They're going into freshman year, highest rates of burnout from sports. You got to think about that. Why? Well, they quit having fun. That second bullet point's really important. Most of them say they quit having fun, and I'm tired of dealing with my parents. Signs of burnout, most of it is just, a lot of it has to do with performance pressures, fear of failure. They just kind of are exhausted about doing something. They don't want to wake up early anymore to go training. They want to stay out late on a Friday night with their friends because all of the other friends are going to do it. I think one of the key factors is when you really have to be concerned is when they start losing interest in things that are not necessarily related to sports. They just aren't doing the same things they used to. And we do see changes in mental health pattern. And I'll tell you, this is not my expertise. But I'm very passionate about trying to identify it and then getting people to the right place in terms of stress management as well as mental health. So what do I think we need to do as parents? I think you need to set realistic goals for yourself and remind yourself of them. When you're trying to decide what to do and whether you're going to take on another tournament or play on another team, or they're putting together this little side team in this other league, you got to be sure that you meet your goals and don't overdo it for your kids. I would always discuss openly a plan B option. This is particularly difficult for some of our female athletes that are dancers and gymnasts who really, they end up relying on one event as what they've been trying for 3 years. And the question I always have is, well, what are you going to do if this doesn't work? And I mean, everyone in the room, just their eyes welt up and they don't know what their plan B is. So as a parent, it's our job to help them get there. Plan B can be like, listen, if you don't make bells, fine, you can do this instead, or drill team or whatever. But as a parent, it's better for them to hear you say, it's okay to fail, and here is an alternative to it. Talk a little bit about nutrition. Nutrition is really important. Some key tips here that we're just going to talk about how to think about nutrition in the short term as well as in the long term. Probably the biggest problems that we see are your picky eaters. They tell the parent what they're going to eat. The parent doesn't tell them what they're going to eat. That's a problem, particularly in sports. So if you're asking your body to put in a lot of caloric needs during a period of growth, during puberty may be the most sensitive time for all of this to optimize your nutrition. And sometimes that's hard to really know when that is. I think there are some great opportunities to think about what you need to eat coming up on a tournament. What's a quick energy opportunity for you? What are great things? I think your kids, when they open up the cabinet, will love to get their favorite snack, but I think sometimes you can make a suggestion of how about some yogurt with granola and some strawberries instead. And oftentimes that's going to be a far better snack and still has a lot of taste to it. And obviously that handout is available for you. We really found that in our ACL patients that most of them were generally poor eaters. We've been screening this in our clinic, particularly when you have an ACL injury. We know that they're mostly skipping meals a day. And so whether that's, I don't know if it's causative or not, but the reality is we know that a lot of young athletes that we treat physically, this concept of the female athlete triad, you're going to see this a lot in your gym, a lot in your gymnasts and your female athletes, but we do see it in males. And I'll tell you, we just need to identify it and get your kids to the right place. Not eating enough food for the caloric demands that they have is a problem. It's a problem for their hormones. It's a problem for their development. And during puberty and growth is the right time to really be knowledgeable of that and to try to have a good understanding because long-term osteoporosis can be, again, that's not a short-term problem. That's a long-term problem that is definitely highlighted in our youth athletes, particularly during puberty and those periods of growth. Some take-home points: avoid hungry eating. Don't skip breakfast, skip a snack so that your child has a really large dinner. That's not great nutrition. It'll affect their performance long term. Avoid the heavy meals. Can't tell you how many times we've gone to soccer game and then lunch and then soccer game, and at lunch, 80% of the athletes order chicken fingers and French fries. That's not the right opportunity. Hydration. 72 hours before a big weekend, particularly important in the summertime. Hydrating the morning of is probably not good enough, but better than nothing. But 2 or 3 days beforehand, get your kids to start drowning water before a big weekend, particularly in the heat. Sleep. One of the most interesting things that we found in our research is patterns of sleep. We found that those that don't eat well, they don't sleep well, which is what we found in some of our data here. So skipping breakfast, low sleep duration, sleep disturbance, overall sleep quality is low. So I do think that there is a relationship between having good habits and having a good persona all the way around. We found this with the pandemic. In fact, in our survey, this was the most positive thing I found, which was our kids were sleeping more appropriate hours and their quality of sleep was improved during COVID. So what does that say? Well, it says before COVID, they were probably doing too much. I will say that I have not, most of the things I've talked about, I've researched and I can give you with some sense of confidence. The one thing I don't know is whether sleep patterns have a rate of injuries, but my colleagues in Boston have shown that. Less than 8 hours of sleep, higher rates of injury when the population is all equal. So we do think that sleep is important. And I also think sleep is important for recovery as well. Hey, I need to get to in 8 weeks I have to be healed. Well, your body will heal better if you get better sleep and have new nutrition. We know that. So tips for improving sleep, be sure you get the right amount of sleep, talk to your kids about it, and try to be an advocate for it. Keeping on a schedule, many of you guys remember this as an infant, you're supposed to keep them on a really good schedule. I think our youth athletes need to be on similar schedule. Probably the one thing that's the hardest for all of us is 1 to 2 hours before bedtime, no electronics, try to avoid big meals, and kids these days, middle school, high schools, the caffeine is readily accessible as well, so we need to really limit that so that they have good sleep patterns overall. Last but not least, it's just don't forget, this is intense, it's busy, we're all into it, we're all emotional about it, I am as well. Have fun. There are a lot of positive with youth sports. I was talking to someone earlier today about how they felt like their kids weren't elite athletes, so they just kind of given up on all the positives of sports. And that's the downside to this industry that we're in, that we're so heavily into the elite sports, is that middle area of I just want to do sports to have good exercise and have good just to be overall good fitness. We've lost a little bit of that because there are a lot of positives: teamwork, discipline, socialization. All of those are really positives for sports. So just because your kid doesn't make the top team, we should still be very aggressive about keeping them in athletics. The Aspen Institute has done a really great job of promoting reasons why sports are good for kids. They get into drugs less. They actually have lower cardiovascular rates when they're older. Obesity rates are less. So there are long-term implications to being involved in sports that go beyond the overdoing it in sports, if you will. As you guys could tell, we're very, very passionate, at least myself and our team, about trying to figure out how we can whittle away at this problem that we're seeing, because we don't really always know the answers, because I know parents are driving it. We're just trying to figure out how we can educate, give people the right tools, and hopefully we can kind of trim it down and at least keep our athletes as best we can. And I do think it is a 360 view. We got to look at everything. It's not, as a surgeon, I'm used to fixing kids. That's actually what I like to do. I call it my day job, but like my hobby is trying to figure out how we can limit the injuries and the harm that we're doing to our kids. If you guys haven't visited our campus, we love to do research on healthy kids as well. We're always looking at it. Two of our really popular projects right now is we're looking at the neurocognitive recovery following an injury. We're also looking at menstrual cycle. ACL rates in female soccer players are skyrocketing right now. Tends to always happen during a certain period of their menstrual cycle. So we're trying to look at that a little bit more deeply as well. I guess 5 minutes for questions if you guys have any. Thank you for your attention. Appreciate it.